Welcome to the Health Made Easy podcast. Health advice so easy, you'll feel more confident about your body, health, and life. And now, your host, Dr. Connie Sjogren.
Hey everybody, so this is Q&A Friday. So I have 3 questions from you guys. First one comes from Nancy Dowling, and she asks, how do the symptoms of lupus and Sjogren's overlap, and is the complement 3 and 4 blood level indicative of both? So the symptoms of Sjogren's disease is dry mouth and dry eyes, and it's also an autoimmune condition, and some lupus patients have it. So I don't believe the symptoms necessarily overlap, but you might have some antibodies indicative of it. So in order for me to effectively answer this question, though, I would have to discuss the complement levels and the implications of that. So rheumatologists typically measure C3, C4, and CH50 for lupus patients, among other based on your disease. But according to various studies that I looked at, the complement levels provide a rather poor measure of clinical activity for 4 reasons. So I want you guys to always know that you guys should be asking your rheumatologist for AVISE testing for this reason. And I've been using AVISE testing for myself, so it's just been such a better test all around. So first, reason is because there's a wide variation in normal complement levels between each individual, partly because of genetics. For example, genetically, my personal complement levels tend to be on the lower limits of normal. I've always been kind of normal. And second, complement levels are controlled by our bodies and our ability to make protein and break it down, and it varies from person to person, right? And then third is measurement of complement levels may not reflect accurately what is occurring in our tissues. For some, it can affect our muscles, and for others, it can affect our kidneys. So it's not really a clear indication of, the levels telling us exactly what about the disease activity. And lastly, the autoantibodies to complement proteins are due to the inflammation, the underlying inflammation. And the levels of complement activation may be associated with the levels of these antibodies rather than by disease per se. So those are my key reasons. And there's no single test that will confirm a diagnosis for Sjogren's. And someone does not have to test positive to be diagnosed with Sjogren's. But the classic blood test for Sjogren's would be SSA, which is one of the clearest blood test markers for Sjogren's. And diagnosis for this is difficult because about 30% of patients are negative for this marker. And negativity, though, also doesn't mean that you don't have Sjogren's. So it's sort of a wash to that regard. And so the association with C3, C4, and even CH50 is kind of blurred for that reason. So I hope that makes sense. Second question comes from Samira Nicholson, and she asks, why will it take about 6 years to find out that you have lupus? Well, lupus isn't something that's acquired overnight, and there's so many variables to this disease, from your stress level to your lifestyle before getting diagnosed, with toxic exposures to your genetic susceptibility. And so when it's thought that lupus is triggered by a virus or injury or even bacterial infection, it's the health of the host, which is us, and the tolerance that crosses the threshold into full-blown autoimmune response to be able to detect. In some cases, a low-grade inflammation over time can evolve into an autoimmune condition. That's why I show up every week to empower you to reverse your state, because ultimately it can get better. So I liken this to sort of a pot of water boiling, right? At some point, it simmers and it simmers. And that simmering effect is a healthy immune response, and that's what we want. But for us, that simmering point has increased so much so that it almost becomes a boiling point. And so it's sort of like you keep boiling that water, and then if it goes into a full-blown boiling state and you don't taper down the temperature of the pot, then it spills over, right? So to me, that sort of is likened to you ultimately, or me, getting lupus. So it's harder to place the water that's been boiled over back into the pot. So that's the threshold that I'm talking about. So I like to think of it that way. So I hope that clears it up. Some of us, for me, it took me about 2 years and 2 months to diagnose it. I've had patients who's been having low-grade symptoms for a long time. But rest assured, if you're not really diagnosed with it yet, that's a good thing, because I wish I was there, because it's like that tipping point. You can lower the inflammation right now if you're not diagnosed, and then hopefully reverse the symptoms rather than showing up to your doctor to try to figure out what exactly is wrong and wanting a diagnosis. I wish, in retrospect, I would have done that myself to be smarter and wiser as I am now after living with it for 19 years, to do something about it at that time, so I don't have to go through what I've gone through for the 19 years. So I hope that helps. Last one comes from Rachel De La Rosa, and she asks, has anyone ever tried taking aminos, not necessarily before a workout, but for a big day to help repair? I don't think you mean aminos, but I think you mean amino acids. Those are the proteins, right? Which are the building blocks for our body that are essential for repair. It's a good idea to take it, but also recommend something with gut restoration to aid in not only the absorption of those amino acids, but also to restore your gut. But to your question, if you're trying to repair, those amino acids certainly will help you to heal faster. So that's a very good question. That's a good point. If you are trying to repair, I'm assuming you're going to go for a race or whatever you're doing. So stay hydrated also, and make sure that, you eat a good meal, days leading up to, or be nutriently sound days leading up to whatever it is that you're trying to do. And even post-surgical, I usually recommend a good source of complete profile amino acids to my patients so that they can recover from the surgery so much faster. So with that, have a great weekend, you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Health Made Easy podcast. www.drconniezhang.com